So today's video is, I guess, kind of a spin-off of my usual Searching Sabbath series on faith, and I'm going to call it a Sunday supplement because it's a response to a video that Ed Dickerson made in response to a previous video I made about Adventist teaching about creation and evolution. And as he was kind enough to respond to some of my points, I want to respond to some of his. First of all, I'll have to say I don't have the technical ability at this point to switch back and forth between clips of his video and mine and embed his video and mine like he did. So viewers, if there are viewers for this besides me and Ed, you're going to need to watch his whole video before you see my reply to it. First of all, Ed, I think I'm going to have to respectfully disagree with you about saying that the creation story in Genesis is not a creation myth. It absolutely is a creation myth, and like you, I'm not using the word myth to imply falsehood, but you seem to be suggesting something there about literary style and saying that just because the Genesis story is not in the same literary style, for example, as the Inu Melesh, it isn't a creation myth, but it absolutely is. It's a story people told to explain their origins. There's an Inuit creation myth in my Newfoundland and Labrador Studies textbook that I teach my students that is obviously an English translation of a myth that was handed down through oral tradition in some Inuit language. It takes up about a paragraph. So the fact that something is short and to the point does not make it not a creation myth. The Genesis story employs a lot of poetic techniques, particularly the use of repetition, and I think it would definitely qualify, at least for my definition of a creation myth. I think you could also call the theory of evolution a creation myth, or an origin story at least. It's the driving origin story of most of our Western culture today, and like any origin story, it shapes the way people see themselves, not just their past, but their future. Now, getting back to evolution, you said that I overvalued science a little bit too highly. And I guess part of that is, as I said, I'm not a scientist. I'm a reader and a writer, and maybe I'm a little bit in awe of science, but I have to say, generally, I think science has a pretty good track record. And that's not to say that scientists never change their minds or never disagree with each other or never have competing theories. They do, but I do trust the scientific method. I believe that this process of subjecting things to testing and critique and evaluation produces good results. That's not to say that science, when divorced from a religious or moral or ethical framework, can't lead us into terrible things like the creation of devastating weapons or economic destruction, but the science itself, I think, is a good method for getting at the truth about the natural world. I think it's a little bit disingenuous to suggest, as you do in your video and as many creationists do, that just because scientists sometimes disagree or change their minds, that means that the Genesis creation story is just as likely to be true as the theory of evolution. To be honest, I don't know of any scientist, leaving aside creation scientists who go in with a particular agenda of something they want to prove, I don't know of any scientific study that has ever suggested that all life on Earth emerged less than 10,000 years ago, or that human beings ever lived for 900 years. There's an awful lot of stuff in the Genesis creation story that, if it is taken literally, simply doesn't square with absolutely any scientific findings except those of people who go in with a particular axe to grind and an agenda to prove, and that worries me. I do agree with your point, by the way, about the age of the Earth, the physical Earth itself. There's obviously room for quite a large gap between, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and the first day of creation. But even then, I think all you've done is account for the geological age of the Earth. You still don't account for the fact that if you take Genesis literally, you have to believe that there were no plants, no animal life, nothing on Earth before 6, 7 at the most thousand years ago, and that simply doesn't line up with anything that any scientist has ever discovered. The timeline is way too short. Is the literal 6-day or 7-day, if you include the Sabbath creation week, important to the writer of Genesis? Absolutely, you're right. They do repeat that formula over and over. The evening and the morning were the first day. The evening and the morning were the second day. Is that because they want us to believe that this was a literal week, or is it because there's some other point being made, possibly a point about the Sabbath as part of the 7-day cycle? I don't know. I'm leaving it out there. I agree absolutely with your final point. It is very difficult to reconcile the idea of a loving creator with a process of evolution that is carried out through generation after generation of suffering and death before we ever get to the fall and sin entering the world. It's probably my biggest stumbling block with the idea of theistic or guided evolution, and although I know many Christians who believe in that, I've never had anyone really explain that to me in a way that's satisfying. But I think because of that and so many other things, I'm really willing to leave the whole question of origins in a box marked, I don't understand this, God will explain it to me at some later date. And I guess that's another question that I'm posing for you. Is it okay to do that, do you think? Is it all right to put things in a box that say, I don't know and I don't feel I have to know? Or do we have to have absolute certainty on every point of faith? Because if we do, that's a little worrisome to me because I'm not sure I can do that.